Stephen, Littleproud beat Canavan, but I can't see how the Liberals could risk a split with the Nationals by dumping their nuclear power policy or going Labor light in climate policies.
Look, it's going to be a real challenge for them to straddle the National Party's position. When the nuclear policy was announced, I was a little bit cynical about it from the Liberal National perspective. They needed to not, drive the left and the Teal seats further away from themselves. So they had to say, well, we're still committed to, net zero by 2050, but at the same time, they needed to keep the national parties in the cart. And so this was a way of sort of keeping both parts together. It wasn't meaningful, as you've mentioned, I think, and others have mentioned. They didn't campaign in the seats, they didn't champion the policy anywhere, and it just about disappeared without trace. And they allowed Labor to claim it cost $600 million. And I think I heard Littleproud say it's not $660 billion, it's only $330 billion of taxpayers' money to be used to fund it.
The campaign's one, you don't need to exaggerate.
I was once criticised. No, I'm saying that's what Littleproud said. It was $330 billion in an interview a couple of days out. That was the whole thing with renewables. So we can't let Labor keep saying it's... Yeah. So I think nuclear was a way to keep the Nats and the Liberals and the left of the Liberals all in the same camp. Look, now they're getting to make the hard choice. Are they going to stick the path on the nuclear option, which is a nationalised industry, not something the Liberal Party would normally do, or are they going to move down the path to try and win those Teal seats back and become what you call Labor light? And that is a very difficult proposition.
Michael Kroger, what do you think?
Well, you can't possibly dump the nuclear policy for all the obvious reasons. I think what should happen, Andrew, is the opposition should say that our responsibility as a government would be to provide the regulatory framework for the nuclear industry to operate effectively in Australia, consistent with domestic and international obligations, and we'll be funding the nuclear industry to the extent the same percentage that we fund the renewable industry, but that it's basically a private sector investment. But we will subsidise, we will provide the regulation, but it's over to the private sector. I think that's the way forward. Otherwise, it'll never happen, Andrew.
Well, let's go to the reshuffle, Stephen. There weren't that many changes, just a couple I'll talk about, but one in particular, you had Ed Husic dumped as Industry Minister because of a factional thing, the right, New South Wales right versus the Victorian right. He lashed out at Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles for being the faction boss who dumped him for another faction member. Have a look.
The difficult issue here is that we've had sort of barefaced ambition and a Deputy Prime Minister wield a factional club to reshape the ministry. I think when people look at a Deputy Prime Minister, they expect to see a statesman, not a factional assassin.
Now, former Prime Minister Paul Keating went nuts saying this was terrible and terrible. And Stephen, you are fingered as the faction heavy who got rid of Husic and or Attorney General Mark Dreyfus. What was your reasoning for doing so?
Well, look, I'm a feather duster. I've been out of Parliament for 9 years, and it's very flattering for people
Stephen,
to suggest
it's in all the papers.
Had some role to play in this. You shouldn't always believe what you read in the newspapers. Look, can I just make a point
Stephen,
about
Stephen, you and I know
comments?
what you and I know.
I mean, so, look, Paul Keating has always lived by the maxim, if you don't live in Sydney, you're camping out. And he's more and more starting to appear as a desiccated coconut. I admit that Sam and Dan have not managed a rock band as a qualification for getting into Parliament, but Dan Merlino has got a PhD in economics from Yale, and Sam Ray has got a science degree from ANU and an MBA from Melbourne Business School. So to try and suggest that some individuals in Victoria, because they live in Victoria, don't have qualifications, Paul, is just, frankly, an embarrassment to yourself.
But why did you get rid of Husic and not Chris Bowen?
Look, there has been some
question.
misperception. The problem that the national right had was that because there was a landslide and the socialist left picked up a much greater proportion of that landslide, the balance of the ministry went from 16-14 to the right to 15-15. So somebody in the right was going to lose their job. Victoria,
Fine, you had to lose one of them. But why did you get rid of Husic and not Chris Bowen as a failure?
Now, the New South Wales right determined their 5 positions. It was up to them to determine, not Richard Marles, not the Victorian right. So I've seen some of these issues conflated. The right had to lose 1 position to the socialist left. The New South Wales right chose their 5 and the Victorians chose their 4. So the New South Wales right were in charge of their own decisions, not Richard Marles and not the Victorian right.
Stephen Conroy and not Stephen Conroy. Michael Kroger, the Liberal leadership tomorrow, you've got the Liberal Party's got even tougher choices to make there. How do you see that going down?
Look, Andrew, before we get to that, I want to congratulate Stephen on his promotion to factional assassin. I think he did a great job. Dumping Ed Husic was I mean, we didn't know this at the time, but the reason for dumping Ed Husic was very visible yesterday on the Insiders program. Well done on predicting that. And Mark Dreyfus, for all the reasons we know, Andrew, Mark Dreyfus should have resigned from that cabinet months and months ago over the appalling treatment of Israel and the Jewish community in Australia. And Mark Dreyfus sat there stum for 2 years and did nothing about that. So, again, congratulations on him being removed. On the other issue, Andrew, that's a matter for the Parliamentary Party, as we know. People from the organisational wing like me and others, you don't have enough knowledge of the MPs working in shadow cabinet and policy committees, etc. So you just don't know the policy interests over the years of the particular candidates. So people outside the Parliament, this is always John Howard's view, by the way, are not the best judge of who the Parliamentary Party should pick as leader, and that's why we leave it to them, and I'm sure they'll do a good job tomorrow.
Michael, you and I know that when the camera's not rolling, you've got plenty of opinions as to who should be leader and why. Well, let's tell us who you think the favourite is.
I think they're equal favourites, actually. I don't know.
Oh my goodness!
If you talk to people's, hang on. Some say Angus is favourite, and some say Susan's favourite. So the answer is I don't know. I haven't spoken enough about them to work that out. Yeah, I'm not involved in the leadership ballot. It's Andrew, years and years of involvement in the Liberal Party have told me that once organisational people start getting involved in the leadership ballots, it never helps. I can tell you that, it never helps. They don't want views from outside the Parliamentary Party. That is the long history.
Stephen, can I ask you to put aside your faction leader cudgels for a second? Could you give a frank appraisal as to who should be leader to take it up to the Labor Party? Knowing that you've got nothing to lose, they're going to win the next election anyway. So,
look, if I had to choose who would be the best choice for the Labor Party, I would go for the Taylor Price ticket. Susan Ley at least has a chance to rebuild the Liberal Party, and depending on who she picks as a deputy, if she strikes out with the right policy agenda, that's possible. But I think a Taylor Price ticket is one that people in the Labor Party would be raising their glasses to tomorrow.
Gentlemen, Michael Kroger, Stephen Conroy, thank you very much to you both.